I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about what is consciousness according to Henri Bergson in his book Mind Energy. The problem of consciousness is for Henri Bergson the most fundamental question that philosophy needs to address. I will examine the first two chapters of his book, Mind Energy, which is a collection of some of his lectures and published articles on his philosophy of mind. The first is a lecture at the University of Birmingham in 1911, and the second comes from a talk in Paris the following year. In the lecture, he does not start his exploration of the problem by trying to narrow down consciousness into a definition, which, while it may make it convenient to analyze, may lead us down wrong paths, as a rigid definition will not have the flexibility to deal with what in reality is more sinuous and mobile. Instead, he wants to consider certain lines of facts, certain empirical observations which may point us in the right direction to a theory of mind. Note that he uses mind, soul, spirit, psyche, and consciousness interchangeably. The original title of the book is L'Energie Spirituelle, but in the translation which he approved, it is Mind Energy. Bergson begins by considering what consciousness is, using two lines of facts based on two major features of consciousness: memory and anticipation. Without memory, there is no consciousness. If one is unable to conserve its past, forgetting itself unceasingly, that is what being unconscious is like. While memory is a recollection of the past, what consciousness uses its memory for is to anticipate the future. To do this, consciousness pays attention to what in its memory can help it to bring about its desired future. We have talked about the past and the future, but what about the present? To Bergson, the present is merely a marker, a theoretical line separating the past and future. When we recognize what is taking place in the present instant, it already had passed. For instance, when we see a person get knocked down on the streets, by the time our mental machinery registers what has happened is already in the past. What we actually perceive is a certain span of duration composed of two parts: our immediate past and our imminent future, writes Bergson. In this case, the imminent future could be how we are already running to help the victim. The accident and our going to help all seem to be in the present for us, but in actuality was a span of duration. However, there are many memories that our consciousness could have selected to help us. For instance, we may never have witnessed a car accident before, but we have been involved in other somewhat similar incidents, such as a mass stabbing, where we survived because we ran away instead of toward the victims to help them. We also have previously helped someone who fell down the stairs. Yet our consciousness seems to have selected the latter instead of the former. Both memories are similar to the car accident, but are not the same as a car accident. As a matter of fact, nothing will be exactly identical to that car accident, even another car accident, since the details will differ. Our consciousness has to make a choice between which memory will better inform our current experience, so as to enable us to react in the most appropriate way. Bergson says, in order to choose, we must know what we can do and remember the consequences, advantages or injuries of what we have already done. We must foresee and we must remember. Since memory is a key part of consciousness, where our memories reside is likely also where our consciousness resides. Bergson looks at the scientific literature on brain lesions, where a part of the brain is damaged or wounded. Say a part that controls auditory signals is damaged. All memories may lose their sound accordingly, but the memories themselves, other than their sounds, are intact. If and when the brain recovers, sound returns to the memories. If the brain is where memories reside, then when a part of the brain gets damaged, the memories purportedly imprinted into those parts should likewise be lost. Yet when a part of the brain gets damaged, the studies show that the memories may lose some features but remain in existence. Hence, Bergson deduces that memories do not reside in the brain. Since memory is a key part of consciousness, consciousness therefore also does not reside in the brain. It is not a material thing like the brain. He will, in chapter 7, argue both against the doctrine of materiality and idealism, but suffice it to say that for him as a dualist, the mind is immaterial while the brain is a material substance. The brain and the body are organs of action which the mind uses to carry out its intentions. How do we know which things are conscious? We cannot know for certain since we have to be that object we are wondering about to know for sure. However, we can know with some degree of probability. With regards to another human being, we know with a high degree of probability that that person is conscious because we know we are conscious, and by analogy, a being that resembles us is hence likely to be conscious. Bergson, unlike other thinkers such as Charles Sanders Peirce or Arthur Schopenhauer, does not think that all things are conscious, that all things have a will. Bergson is not a panpsychist and thinks that to say that all things are conscious is equivalent to saying nothing, since consciousness is in fact what distinguishes between living and non-living things. Mind is fundamental but only to living things. Bergson thinks that all living things possess some degree of consciousness, which they use when they exercise their ability to move. However, most plants and even some animals, such as parasites, which cling to their hosts, renounce their ability to move on their own to find their nourishment. Plants are fixed to the ground and find their nourishment there, though Bergson believes that even for plants, the faculty of movement is dormant rather than absent. He writes, "Consciousness, originally immanent in all that lives, is dormant where there is no longer spontaneous movement, and awakens when life tends to free activity. When we do things automatically, we are doing them unconsciously. For instance, when we have a new car or home, we have to be conscious to lock it, but after a while, locking it becomes a habit which we carry out without putting any conscious thought into it." Bergson formulates a thought experiment. We are observers in the early stages of the cosmos, where each living thing has to decide how it wants to live. To be able to move means having to face the uncertainty which choice brings, while to be still means accepting the bounty or poverty of the earth, as the case may be. To choose to get one's nutrition from the ground and become fixed to it the way plants are, is stable and will require no further choice, though ceding future decisions means ceding conscious life. The price of freedom is uncertainty. Bergson writes, "The path towards movement involves risk and adventure, but also it involves consciousness, with its growing degrees of intensity and depth." To burnish his argument, Bergson turns to the inorganic. In an inorganic world comprising only inanimate matter, the behavior of its objects and hence of that world is completely determined by the law of cause and effect and the laws of physics. Because of these ineluctable laws, matter adds nothing to what the world already contains. Every future occurrence can theoretically be calculated using the mechanical laws. Yet in our world comprising living and non-living things, we are unable to predict the future. The laws apply only to inanimate objects, while for conscious beings, the laws are unable to work out what they will do next. Matter is necessity. Consciousness is freedom, according to Bergson. The role of the living is to create, not merely to produce according to fixed laws, but to bring into the world something completely novel. To create requires preparation. To prepare is to utilize one's past experience captured in memories. Life is freedom inserting itself within necessity, turning it to its profit, he adds. I see in the whole evolution of life on our planet a crossing of matter by a creative consciousness. This consciousness culminates in human beings, and its prime characteristic is creation. Yet, why does life, which has adapted itself, keep on complicating itself and complicating itself more and more dangerously? Bergson thinks there is an inward impulse driven by love and ambition to multiply in space and complicate in time. Such love, resulting in multiplication, manifests in reproduction, but as for complication, why does humankind seem to possess such ambition that it needs to continually scale new heights? Bergson tells us it is because of our pursuit of joy. Joy is what is experienced when we attain our goals. It differs from pleasure, which is only a contrivance devised by nature to obtain for the creature the preservation of its life. For instance, we experience pleasure when we eat a meal to sate our hunger, which we do to preserve our lives, to survive. Joy is another matter. It is what we may get when we create the meal, say when we successfully create a new dish. We do not need to create a new dish to survive. Merely eating the same old dishes suffice. However, we as conscious beings want more than merely to survive. We want to live. Joy always announces that life has succeeded, gained ground, conquered. All great joy has a triumphant note, writes Bergson. Joy comes from successful creation. Wherever there is joy, there is creation. The richer the creation, the deeper the joy, he says. Contrary to popular belief, we do not do the work of creation for the applause or approbation of others. Praise and applause is only needed when we are less certain about our success. Bergson tells us that he who is sure, absolutely sure of having produced a work that will endure and live, cares no more for praise and feels above glory, because he is a creator, because he knows it, because the joy he feels is the joy of a God. What is it that we create? We create our own self-identity, we grow our character, we go beyond our internal resource using the resources of the world, adding to the wealth of the world. Bergson holds in great esteem people who do not just create, but also inspire others to create. It is the moral man who is a creator in the highest degree. The man whose action is self-intense is also capable of intensifying the action of other men, and is self-generous, can kindle fires on the hearths of generosity. To go further, we need to go together, and do so by living in a society. However, living in a society can be a boon but also a bane. Society needs to subordinate its members to maintain order, but yet need to let them be free in order to progress. In his second chapter on the soul and the body, Bergson does not investigate the essences of the soul nor the body, neither matter nor the mind. Instead, he examines what unites and what separates them, for their union and separation are facts of experience. Bergson has in the first chapter appealed to lines of facts, and now he talks about facts of experience. It is consistent with his modus operandi to get away from reasoning from concepts, which comes from our theories, to looking at what can be observed, a kind of empiricism, but it really is simply an appeal to common sense. Human bodies react to external forces the way other objects do, in accordance to the laws of physics, but there are also voluntary movements that come from within. What is the cause of these voluntary movements? It is the I. And what is this I other than our minds, our consciousness, our soul, which seems to overflow every part of the body which is joined to it, passing beyond it in space as well as in time? Our soul exceeds the body in space, because the body is confined within its surfaces of skin, while our perception exceeds far beyond these boundaries to the stars, effectively to infinity. Our soul exceeds the body in time because the body as matter is strictly in the present, while our consciousness retains the past as memory and uses it in anticipation of the future, which it helps to create. The voluntary act is nothing but a group of movements learnt in previous experience and inflected in a direction each time new by a conscious force whose main purpose appears to be the ceaseless bringing of something new into the world, something new outside itself, and also it creates something new inside itself, Bergson writes. Our voluntary acts reflect what we will, and what we will modifies our character, leading to a self-creation of our personality, which Bergson considers as the very object of human life. He presents the materialist's case, which claims to be the scientific worldview, so as to argue against it. In brief, materialism is the argument that all there exists is material and the consciousness we experience is merely epiphenomenal, not the cause of the body's actions but its effect. I will rehearse these arguments only so that we can see how Bergson counters them. Argument 1. If an efficient will could intervene to perform free actions, the law of the conservation of energy would be violated. Bergson responds that this argument begs the question since the laws of physics are obtained by observing physical phenomena. If the physical phenomena do not bear out the law, then either the law is wrong or the domain of the phenomena needs to be restricted so that the law can apply. In this case, it is the latter, where the law of the conservation of energy can apply only to material things. Argument 2. Consciousness and its associated feelings, known as qualia, are epiphenomena and hence illusory. Bergson's response is that those who make arguments for what seems contrary to regular experience, as in this case, are the ones who owe the burden of proof. The materialists are, however, unable to provide any proof, arguing that the current state of technology is unable at the moment to show how the immaterial is reducible to the material, though it may be able to do so in the future. This future promise is inadequate since their method is purportedly that of observation and empirical evidence, and based on their own method, they have none. He lambasts the materialists. It is impossible to call a thesis scientific which is neither proved nor even suggested by experience. Living things, themselves undetermined, depend on non-living things to be determined, so that they can then use them effectively once they understand what the laws are or how objects respond to stimulus. Bergson suggests that the ability to convert food into energy which then explodes in our muscles to create motion is just one of the ways living things convert physical determinism to its own ends. Bergson argues against the idea that the mind is the brain and that there is an equivalence between them. One is unable to read in the physical occurrences in the brain what the mind is thinking. All we can affirm through scientific observations is that there is a relation, a solidarity between the mind and the brain. He proposes a method where philosophers turn their gaze inwards to try to glimpse, to get a vague intuition of what the insertion of mind in matter may be. They then supplement it by what the fields of psychology and medical sciences can tell them, which may correct and complete their internal experience. Through this dialectic, they can obtain an increasingly adequate solution, not yet perfect but perfectible. Instead, what we have are concepts such as parallelism, which asserts that the soul and the body are two expressions of the same intent. Science was ready to adopt such a solution as it was amenable to posit an equivalence between the mind and the body so as to be able to ignore what is unable to be observed, the mind, to focus on what can be observed, which is the body. However, such an approach is not scientific since such an equivalence is not observed but predicated on an underlying metaphysics of parallelism. Bergson is convinced that the mind overflows the body. While one can observe the actions of the body and from there deduce some of the thoughts leading to these actions, those thoughts are only a fraction of the thoughts and feelings which were being unrolled within the consciousness. So from one state of mind, we can deduce the brain state and its associated bodily actions, but not the converse, since one brain state may have multiple possible mental states. Hence, we cannot deduce what the mind is thinking from examining brain states. The body moves based on the signals from the brain, which transmits them through the nervous system leading to action. If we penetrate into the brain, what we will see is not thought, but the motor accompaniment of thought. Bergson deduces that thought is independent of the brain. Thought is a flow. It is discursive and hence not a state. It is only when thoughts culminate in an idea that thought stops. The role of the brain is to play the life of the mind and to play also the external situations to which the mind must adapt itself. Bergson's conception of the brain is an organ that informs the mind of what is happening in the external world and enacts the order issuing from the mind. He writes, "The brain is neither an organ of thought, nor of feeling, nor of consciousness, but it keeps consciousness, feeling, and thought tensely trained on life, and consequently makes them, that is, consciousness, feeling, and thought, capable of efficacious action. The brain is the organ of attention to life." This explains why a slight modification in the brain can affect the entire mind, be it from chemical intoxication or brain disease. The mind is not deranged when there is a brain disease or poisoning, since the insane can reason in accordance to strict logic. However, his reasoning has lost contact with actuality the way one is not in touch with reality when dreaming. A loosening of the tension, or rather of the attention to life, which keeps the mind fixed on the part of the material world which concerns its actions, such is the only direct result of cerebral derangement, writes Bergson. Despite Bergson's opposition to materialism, this does not make him an idealist. Recall that his position is dualist, a doctrine which comes from René Descartes, where there are two primary substances, the res extensa and the res cogitans, or matter and mind. What Bergson is against is parallelism, the theory of equivalence between the cerebral and the mental. In the final chapter of Mind Energy, he shows it to be self-contradictory, that it requires us to adopt two opposite points of view at one and the same time, and use two systems of notation simultaneously when they are mutually exclusive. Reasoning alone does not give us a way out, and so he will appeal to experience to give us the answer. Because an examination of all these theories and all relevant facts will be too lengthy, he will only look at one aspect that most favors parallelism in order to debunk it. This aspect is memory. It seems that some forms of memory can be located in the brain. The study of diseases affecting speech has led to the location of verbal memory in some convolutions of the brain, suggesting that memories are impressed physically onto some cells in certain convolutions. However, Bergson argues that if the visual recollection of an object were really an impression left by that object on the brain, there would be not one recollection of an object, there would be thousands or even millions of them. When we observe an object, we see only one face of it. To register the complete object, we have to observe it from other angles, in various light conditions, and from various distances. The object itself may change, for instance wearing different clothing, or bearing different facial expressions in the case of a person, or being in different backgrounds. All this means multiple images need to be cognized. Yet my consciousness presents to me a unique image, a practically invariable recollection of the object or person, evident proof that there is something quite different here from mechanical registration, writes Bergson. The same applies for sounds of words, where the same word pronounced by different persons or by the same person at different times in different sentences sounds different, but yet the word is remembered as one single word. In addition, when the area of the brain purportedly storing the memory is damaged, the memory should thus be irretrievably lost. Yet a vigorous stimulus, such as an emotion, may suddenly bring back the memory. Bergson postulates that it is the motor mechanism to recall that is enfeebled or damaged rather than the memory itself. All these suggest that the role of the brain is not to store the memories but to recall them. If we are satisfied that memories are hence not stored physically in the brain, what remains to be answered is, where are they stored? Bergson says, strictly speaking, I am not sure that the question where can have a meaning when we ask it of something different from a body. To speak of location in space presupposes a material substance, since it is only material substances that occupy space. He also thinks that to consider memories as things that are kept in a container is ill-conceived. He asks, why should recollections which are neither visible nor tangible need a container, and how could they have one if one is speaking of a physical container? However, if we understand that when we speak of the location of memories, we do so in a metaphorical or figurative way, he believes that memories reside in the mind. As it is for memory which is immaterial, to speak of the location of the soul or the mind of a person is also not meaningful. His conclusion on the existence of mind is this: I make no hypothesis. I do not call in aid a mysterious entity. I confine myself to observation, for there is nothing more immediately given, nothing more evidently real than consciousness, and mind is consciousness. Bergson elsewhere has made his famous distinction between time and duration. Time, as in scientific time, divides time into equal parts such as hours, minutes, and seconds. Each minute is exactly the same length as any other minute. However, this spatialization of time does not accord with our experience of time, which Bergson terms duration. Our mental experience of duration is cumulative, where an earlier duration informs a later one. He gives a most elucidating example which problematizes the notion of the present. What is the present? When we speak, say when we use the word conversation, the listener does not hear this word syllable by syllable. He hears the entire word, in fact the entire sentence and the sentences before, to make sense of what is being said. By the time the last syllable is spoken, the first three will already be past. For a person living only in the present instant, they will have no understanding of any speech, since all they hear are syllables. In fact, less than syllables, since even the sound of a syllable takes more than an instant. By the time the present is cognized, it already is past. Indeed, Bergson proposes in chapter 5 that even as we perceive the immediate reality, we are at the same time forming a memory of it, which is suppressed under normal circumstances, to be available on demand in future. Pushing his example to its limit, the understanding of the world and ourselves up to this present instance is informed by all that has come before, as if all of it were one long and extended conversation. Consequently, I believe that our whole past still exists, he writes. It exists in our subconscious, though it is veiled from us. It being hidden from us, however, is a good thing, an advantage, because if this veil did not exist, we will have an information overload where our memories will intrude to the extent that we are unable to live in the now. Because memories are formed alongside perception of the current moment, we will be having a false recognition of the present as if we have already experienced it as memory. He attributes this motor function of the veil to the brain. If the brain did not carry out this role, we will be in something like a dream state, where the brain has relaxed its tension, its control of the veil. Bergson writes, the brain is what secures to us this advantage. It keeps our attention fixed on life, and life looks forward. It looks back only in the degree to which the past can aid it to illumine and prepare the future. To live is, for the mind, essentially to concentrate itself on the action to be accomplished. To live is to be inserted in things by means of a mechanism which draws from consciousness all that is utilizable in action, all that can be acted on the stage, and darkens the greater part of the rest. Such is the brain's part in the work of memory. It does not serve to preserve the past, but primarily to mask it, then to allow only what is practically useful to emerge through the mask. The brain does not contain thoughts and memories the way a container contains its contents. Instead, it is an organ, a machine which filters the wealth of memories, selecting what is useful so that it can send instructions to the nervous system and from there to the body so as to generate useful action. Hence, the mind overflows the brain on all sides, and cerebral activity responds only to a small part of mental activity, adds Bergson. The mind makes use of the body, opposite to what the materialists claim, that the mind is an epiphenomenon of the body. Here is a brain which works, and here is a consciousness which feels, thinks, and wills, he writes. This follows the dualism of Descartes, where the body and its organs are a machine which carries out the bidding of the mind, which does the thinking, feeling, and willing. Bergson goes further. We have therefore no reason to suppose the body and the mind are united inseparably to one another. He proposes the possibility of the immortality of the soul, a topic troubling philosophy since time immemorial, though he sees no decisive resolution to the matter. If there was an equivalence of the mind with the brain, then when the brain dies, the mind likewise dies. But since, as he has shown, there is no equivalence, then there is no reason to think that the mind dies when the brain and its body dies. He argues that since there is no equivalence, then those who deny the survival of the soul after the body dies are the ones who have the burden of proving the death also of the soul together with the body. In chapter 3, where he speaks to the Society for Psychical Research in London in 1913 as its newly elected president, he suggests that since minds are immaterial and are hence not limited to a location, phenomena such as clairvoyance and telepathy, where minds can communicate without a physical medium or across time, may be real. Such is the character of Bergson, willing to go where his reasoning takes him. He believes that the path on which science has developed is not inevitable. It could have taken a different direction if the focus by the earlier scientists, known then as natural philosophers, such as Johannes Kepler, Galileo Galilei, and Isaac Newton, has instead of being on matter been focused on mind as a fundamental force or substance in the universe. Psychical research then could have been a major field of study and yet may still be. To conclude, I want to reflect on why Bergson entitled his book Mind Energy, or if directly translating from the French title, Spiritual Energy. Its translator, Wildon Carr, indicates among other things that it is a gesture towards how the science of Bergson's era was shifting away from a static matter-based paradigm to a dynamic energy-based or processual paradigm of reality. Just as energy is a fundamental way of conceiving the world, so is mind. I, however, want to bring up Max Scheler's conception of spirit. He theorizes that spirit possesses no energy of its own. Our energy resides with our drives. When we deny our drives, this denial diverts the energy that would have been used in the satisfaction of our drives towards our spirit, giving it the energy it needs to pursue its task. I do not know if Bergson is acquainted with Scheler's work. While I think that Scheler is right about denying our drives as a way to energize our spirit, a concept which I find most intriguing, I think Bergson has named his book Mind Energy because he is talking about the force, the power that the mind has. Our mental energy is a power to create, to bring something new into the world, and in a society, we can energize one another to carry out the free and joyful act of creation, so as to add to the wealth of the world, not a monetary wealth, but a spiritual wealth. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.